The new director demoted me to hire his son, claiming it was best for the company. He thought I'd quietly accept it and fade away. What he didn't know was that I'd been watching him very carefully, and I had something that would end everything he'd built. My name is Robert Mitchell, and at 44 years old, I thought I understood corporate politics. I'd spent 15 years climbing the ladder at Pinnacle Industries, earning my way up to marketing director through hard work and results. I never imagined that my biggest challenge wouldn't come from competitors or market changes, but from the man hired to lead our company into the future. 6 months ago, our board of directors brought in Harold Thompson as our new CEO. Harold was 58, silver-haired, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes from decades of executive experience. He'd previously turned around 2 struggling companies, and our board was convinced he could do the same for Pinnacle Industries. From the moment Harold walked through our doors, something felt off about him. Maybe it was the way he scheduled private meetings with department heads, asking detailed questions about our processes, our client relationships, our proprietary systems. Or maybe it was how he always seemed to be taking notes during conversations that should have been routine. But I started watching him very carefully. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, but 15 years in corporate America had taught me to trust my gut when something didn't feel right. Harold wasted no time making changes. Within his first month, he'd restructured 3 departments, claiming we needed to streamline operations for maximum efficiency. He spoke in corporate buzzwords and presented every decision as data-driven. But I noticed patterns that others seemed to miss. He was particularly interested in our marketing department, not just our strategies or campaigns, but our client databases, our research methodologies, our competitive analysis reports, information that, in the wrong hands, could be incredibly valuable to our competitors. 3 months into Harold's tenure, he called me into his office for what he described as a strategic realignment discussion. I knew before I sat down that my world was about to change. "Robert, you've done excellent work here," Harold began, shuffling through papers that I realized were organizational charts. "But I believe it's time for some fresh perspectives in leadership roles." He slid a document across his desk. My new job description, senior marketing consultant. A demotion in everything but the careful wording. "I don't understand," I said, though I was beginning to understand perfectly. "My department has exceeded targets for 3 consecutive years. Our client retention rate is the highest it's ever been." Harold smiled that politician's smile I'd grown to despise. "This isn't about performance, Robert. It's about bringing in fresh energy, new ideas. Sometimes experience can become a limitation." That's when he delivered the news that confirmed my suspicions. "I'm promoting Kyle Thompson to marketing director. He's got an MBA from Northwestern and some innovative ideas about digital marketing." Kyle Thompson, Harold's 26-year-old son who'd been unemployed for 8 months after graduating with his MBA. Kyle, who'd never held a marketing position, never managed a team, never even worked in our industry. "Harold, with all due respect, Kyle has no experience in our sector. He doesn't understand our clients, our market dynamics." "Robert," Harold interrupted, his voice taking on an edge. "This decision has been made. Kyle starts Monday. You'll be reporting to him, and I expect you to provide whatever support he needs to succeed. This is what's best for the company." I walked out of that office knowing that Harold expected me to quietly accept my demotion, train my replacement, and fade into the background like a good corporate soldier. What he didn't realize was that his decision had just confirmed something I'd been suspecting for months. Because the truth was, I hadn't just been watching Harold casually. I'd been documenting everything. It started innocently enough. Harold's late-night visits to the office, which I noticed because I often worked late myself. His habit of accessing departments outside his normal responsibilities. The way he asked specific questions about our competitors during strategy meetings. But then I started noticing other things. Harold's computer screen visible through his glass office walls when he thought everyone had gone home. Documents that didn't look like typical CEO reports. Phone conversations that he conducted in hushed tones, often ending abruptly when someone approached his office. So I began staying later, parking where I could observe the building, taking note of when Harold arrived and left. I started a private document tracking patterns that individually seemed innocent, but collectively painted a troubling picture. Harold wasn't just working late. He was working alone, accessing systems and files that had nothing to do with normal CEO functions. And he was photographing documents with his personal phone. 3 weeks after my demotion, Kyle started his new position as marketing director. Watching him stumble through basic marketing concepts while managing my former team was painful. But it also confirmed that Kyle's promotion wasn't about his qualifications. It was about access. As Kyle's senior consultant, I was expected to guide him through every aspect of our department's operations. Harold framed it as mentorship, but I quickly realized what was really happening. Through Kyle, Harold was gaining detailed access to our most sensitive marketing intelligence. Kyle would ask me questions that seemed beyond his level of interest or understanding. "Dad wants to know about our pricing strategy for the Meridian account," he'd say. Or, "Can you walk me through our competitive analysis on TechFlow solutions?" That's when I realized Harold wasn't just a new CEO learning the business. He was conducting systematic intelligence gathering, and Kyle was his unwitting accomplice. But I still didn't understand the full scope of what Harold was doing until I discovered something that changed everything. It was a Thursday evening, around 8 p.m. Harold's car was in the parking lot, but Kyle had left hours earlier. I'd been working late in my office when I noticed light coming from our server room, a restricted area that required keycard access and was typically only accessed by our IT department. I walked down the hallway and found the server room door propped open. Inside, Harold was connected to our main database with a portable drive, clearly copying files. When he saw me, he didn't even try to hide what he was doing. "Robert, good timing," he said casually. "I'm backing up some critical files for security purposes." But I could see the file names on his screen. Client contracts, proprietary research, financial projections, and worse, he was copying files from our competitors' folders, intelligence we'd gathered through legitimate market research that would be incredibly valuable to rival companies. That night, I went home and began researching Harold Thompson more thoroughly. What I found made my blood run cold. Harold's previous turnaround successes weren't what they seemed. Both companies he'd supposedly saved had ultimately failed within 2 years of his departure, after losing major clients to competitors who seemed to have insider knowledge of their strategies. Harold wasn't a turnaround specialist. He was a corporate spy. The next morning, I called our IT department and requested access logs for our database systems. What I found confirmed my worst fears. For 6 months, Harold had been systematically copying our entire corporate intelligence database. Client lists, strategic plans, financial models, competitive analysis, everything that would give a rival company an insurmountable advantage in our market. But I needed more evidence before I could act, so I installed monitoring software on my computer that could track network activity. I started documenting Harold's access patterns, screenshotting the files he accessed, even recording some of his late-night phone conversations. What I discovered over the next 2 weeks was a sophisticated corporate espionage operation. Harold was working for Apex Industries, our biggest competitor. They'd hired him not to save Pinnacle Industries, but to destroy it from the inside. His job was to steal our proprietary information, sabotage our client relationships, and ultimately drive our company into bankruptcy so Apex could acquire our assets at a fraction of their value. Kyle's promotion wasn't nepotism. It was operational necessity. Harold needed someone in marketing who would give him unfettered access to our most sensitive client data. But Harold had made one critical error. He'd assumed I would quietly accept my demotion and cooperate with his son out of corporate loyalty. Instead, he'd created an enemy who understood exactly what he was doing and had the access necessary to document everything. I now had 6 weeks of evidence. Network logs showing Harold's systematic data theft, photographs of him copying files in the server room, recordings of phone conversations where he discussed timeline acceleration and asset transfer protocols. Instead of going to our board of directors, I decided to contact the FBI. I called their tip line and was connected to Agent Sarah Chen, who specialized in corporate intelligence theft. Agent Chen reviewed my evidence and confirmed what I already knew. Harold Thompson was conducting systematic corporate espionage. "We want to build an airtight case," Agent Chen explained. "That means we need you to continue documenting his activities while we prepare for intervention." For the next month, I lived a double life. During the day, I played the role of the demoted employee, training Kyle and providing Harold with whatever information he requested. But every evening, I was documenting his crimes. Agent Chen and I developed a plan for Harold's final downfall. I created fake documents detailing a non-existent Project Phoenix, supposedly Pinnacle Industries' secret expansion into overseas markets. The documents looked legitimate but were completely fabricated. Then I made sure Kyle had access to these documents. As expected, within 48 hours, Harold was copying the fake files and transmitting them to his handlers at Apex Industries. That's when Agent Chen activated her team. On a Wednesday morning in November, I watched from my office as FBI agents entered our building. They went directly to Harold's office, where they found him in the middle of uploading client data to an encrypted server registered to Apex Industries. Harold's face when he realized he'd been caught was everything I'd hoped for. 6 months of arrogance and manipulation crumbled into panic as agents seized his computer, his phone, and the portable drives he'd been using to steal our data. Kyle was arrested at the same time. His ignorance of the larger operation didn't matter. He'd been actively participating in data theft for months. As Harold was led out in handcuffs, he looked directly at me through my office window. In that moment, he understood exactly what had happened. The quiet, demoted employee he'd dismissed had orchestrated his complete destruction. Harold was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for corporate espionage and conspiracy. Kyle received 3 years despite his claims of ignorance. As for me, Pinnacle Industries board offered me Harold's position as CEO along with a formal apology. I accepted the role and spent my first year rebuilding the security protocols Harold had compromised. We also sued Apex Industries for industrial espionage and won a $50 million settlement that more than compensated for the damage Harold had caused. 6 months after Harold's conviction, I received a letter from him in prison. He wrote that he'd underestimated me, that he'd assumed I was just another corporate drone who would accept whatever treatment I received. I never responded to his letter. There was nothing to say. Harold Thompson had built his career on deception and betrayal, thinking he was smarter than everyone around him. What he didn't realize was that some of us were watching very carefully, and we had something that would end everything he'd built. Sometimes the quiet employee in the corner isn't fading away. Sometimes they're just gathering evidence.